All right, so we'll start off with our usual warm-up to get going by just looking over our shoulders, left and right. And up and down. I'm going to roll our head from shoulder to shoulder, keeping the shoulders down, so no shrugging. Sometimes I like to basically hold my hands behind my back and kind of pull down on it, and then just make sure that I'm not going to shrug. Especially if you're really tight up there, it's easy to kind of do that by accident. Good, and some shoulder rolls. Yeah, stiff on this rainy day. And reverse. Good, and some arm circles. You can do whatever size and speed works for you. I like to go right just straight to the big one. Feel it more in the lats and stuff, so. And reverse. Good, and some arm crossovers, basically giving ourselves some hugs on this Monday evening. Now that we can hug our friends, we got to make sure that the hugging muscles are feeling pretty good and limber. Cool. So now we're going to do some reach back. So you're going to get into a nice, stable, athletic base, whatever that means for you. Basically, you just feel nice and comfortable. For me, it's a little bit feet a little bit wider than shoulder width apart. For you, might be wider or a little bit narrow, whatever works. Keeping my hips and legs pointing forward. I'm just going to twist with my torso and reaching for an invisible drink that's behind me. And I'm just going to do that on the other side. So I'm just going back and forth. Now I like to go nice and easy at first. And then if my hips and back are feeling pretty good, you can go a little bit further or a little bit more vigorously. Good. You know, we're going to do some hula hoops, so just big old hip circles. And reverse directions. Good. Now we're going to work on each side of the hip individually. Balance on one leg. We're lifting the other leg up, whatever height is comfortable. Rotate it out and down. So everything else is pointing forward except for this one leg that's rotating. Sounds like we're doing the Riker maneuver, just lifting our leg up and over the chair before we sit down. If you need to hold on to a chair or something, that is fine for balance. The balance is nice, but it's bonus. We really want to focus on that hip mobility. In reverse direction. So now I'm going to lift the leg up from my outside and then bring it back to my midline and down. Good, and switch legs. Same thing. And reverse. Good. Now we're going to do side-to-side lunges. So Don't go quite your max split reach here. Go a little bit shallower from that. Shift your weight to one side. And we're just going to shift our weight back and forth laterally. So I'm kind of pretending there is spikes over my head. So I don't want to pop up and impale myself. I'm just gliding left and right. The popping up and over is a legit exercise, just a slightly different variation than what we're going for here. And after a few reps, you're feeling pretty good. You can go a little bit wider in your stance, go a little bit deeper, and or both. Good. Now we're going to warm up our ankles and calves here. So you got two options as always. One, I can have my toe basically toe down into the ground. And it's like I'm digging a hole, trying to dig a hole through my floor. With the other version, my foot is in the air and I'm just kind of drawing circles with my toes and ankles. It's like the weird hokey pokey version. So hokey pokey or dig a hole through your floor. Those are your two options for this one. And reverse direction. And switch feet. And reverse. Good. Gonna warm up the forearms and wrists by doing some wrist rolls. And reverse directions. Good. Now take the last 30 seconds or so to hit up whatever body part you know needs some extra TLC. I'm just going to be working more on my hips, but if you know your back needs some extra warm-ups, go for that. Shoulders, chest, whatever. Awesome. Grab a quick drink of water and grab your sword and a dagger, or you can do this warm up without the dagger as well because we're going to be working through the closed guards that we did last week. So either way is fine. You can also rotate between the two. I should probably get my app ready for this, huh? Where are we? All right, so we're going to be going through our usual warm up. Or style of warm up, I should say, where we're gonna have like 40 seconds of practicing a body mechanic, then we'll get a 10-second rest, and then we go on to the next one. I'll let everyone know ahead of time what we're doing for each round. This first round, we're going to be practicing our close quarter with the sword high. So if I grab my rapier and dagger, we're gonna be in our defensive posture here. We're gonna, and then we're gonna extend our sword and quarter, dagger goes low, sword's covered, and then finish with a lunge, or you can do with a passing lunge, leaning lunge, whatever type of footwork you want to do with it, go for it. It's all legit. So you got 10 seconds before we get going. Should hear my phone buzz when it gets there. There we go. So fellas run, so 40 seconds of working on that closed quarter with the dagger low and the sword high. Defensive posture, sword extends, dagger covers low, I'm in my forward guard, and then I can take my step lunge if that's what I'm doing. You can also do this with a passing lunge. You have the room in your house. I also make sure that as I recover, I'm kind of pretending that I'm covering my opponent's weapon with my sword. So I'm not just kind of like finishing my lunge and then dropping my hands. It's always good practice to assume that shot missed or you didn't quite kill your opponent there, and you want to protect yourself on the way out. Cool. Up next, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to go into closed secunda. So I'm in my defensive posture, shifting to my closed secunda, and then lunging. So my sword is high at shoulder height, and dagger is low. Depending on the length of your dagger, will depend exactly like where it is in relation to your sword hilt. For me, I like to keep my tip pretty close to the hilt of my sword. And again, good recovery, just in reverse. Good. Up next, close quarter with the sword low and the dagger high. So for my defensive posture, the sword is going to still extend to shoulder height, but the point drifts low. The pommel of my dagger will touch the pommel of my sword like that for people that might need a review. And then you just finish with your lunge. So that's where your dagger is covering the high line. Your sword is covering the low line. Should your opponent try to disengage, they're going to run right into your blade. And the point, I'm aiming the point of my sword either at that upper thigh, or I can even aim it for their like rib cage or their lower abdomen. I don't want to quite go down for the leg shot. But I don't want to keep them both on the high line because they can disengage around that a little bit easier and be able to pop on the other side. All right, up next, we're going to do our closed terza. So for my defensive posture, again, my sword will extend at shoulder height. The point will drift down a little bit, and my dagger or my offhand will cover the high line, basically protecting my head. I could also, I could also turn my sword into secunda, and it's just striking low. So in this guard, the dagger's covering high, my sword's covering low. My sword can be in secunda or terza. Either one of those is perfectly fine. I can use a various amount of footwork. So I can also do my passing lunge here. Couple of seconds left. Also, I'm going to pause this for a second just to kind of walk through this next choreography. We're going to pretend that we found our opponent here on the inside line. Our opponent disengages. So we form a counter disengage and then strike in quarter. I'm striking in quarter with the sword high, dagger low. Imagining that I am controlling my opponent's weapon with my sword the entire time. So I find them, they disengage, counter disengage into my closed quarter, and then whatever type of footwork or attack I want to do. If you have trouble with the visualization, just do a disengage, close quarter, and lunge. Then you're good. Because I know 5 visualization can be really funky. This is also good practice in terms of just getting your dagger to move around your sword and not bump into each other, which can be really difficult if you have big keons or a really long dagger blade. So this is definitely a good one to practice just in terms of being able to maneuver around yourself and not carry your own weapon and then eat one to the face, because that's an embarrassing way to die. And we've all done it. Or you disengage and you smash your finger with the dagger or the sword in the process. We've definitely all done that. All right, last one, same idea on the outside line. So I find on the outside, they disengage, I counter disengage, finish it off in my closed secunda, and then a lunge or passing lunge. I could do a reverse lunge if I really wanted to. And make sure I'm getting some good recovery as well. Traffic copping the blades here, much easier. Good, couple of seconds. Awesome, quick drink, and then we'll jump into tonight's lesson. I gotta open a window. All right, so this week I'm going to set it up similar as last week, in which the first half is going to be open offhand, and then second half we'll do the same exact drills with the dagger, so we can kind of we'll get plenty of reps of all these different moves, and we can also really see how everything changes and stuff. I'm going to, one sec, I'm just going to mute everybody just in case, because there's some background noise happening. Mute, mute, mute. I think everyone is muted now. But if you have a question, you can totally unmute yourself and ask and stuff. That's perfectly fine. So where's my sword? So last week, actually, let me fix my camera here for the recording. So last week, we really looked at the open offhand, the dagger, as backup or support. So the sword is controlling our opponent's weapon, and our offhand or our dagger is really just there in case our opponent tries to come underneath our weapon. We have something kind of blocking their most likely path to the open line. So this means that disengage has to be much bigger, and just keeps us much safer as well. This week, we're going to look at the open offhand or the dagger being the main blade controller. So we're going to be actually attacking with our opponent's blade against our open offhand or against our dagger. As a review for the open offhand, you want to kind of have it a little bit more cupped, open fingers. If this was sharp and you get it in between the fingers, that's your nasty, nasty, nasty paper cut. Honestly, not a big deal in the SCA, because I know a lot of people like to do like finger dancing around the blade. Maybe not a great idea if these were like super sharp. So you kind of just make like your Queen of England shaped palm here. Yeah, get ready for the wave. So that way, if this was sharp and it cut my hand, it's not even cutting all the way across the palm like we're in some blood-packed fantasy film or whatever. It's just going to cut a little bit of my hand, which is what the goal is. Like, if I'm going to get cut on my hand, I want to make it as small as possible. So no finger paper cuts and no big blood packs. So Queen of England is what we're going here for the open offhand. So the first thing we're going to look at is basically finding our opponent's sword with our own sword, and then transitioning to our open offhand. So we're going to start off on the inside line. So here, I'll do it from this angle, and I'll play around with different angles for you as well. I'm going to step in, find my opponent's sword here on the inside line. I like doing this specifically from a closed position, so my hand by my my elbow, because as I have my opponent's blade found, I should do this from the front here. It's much easier for me to start sneaking my offhand, basically hidden behind my sword, until I get control over their weapon, or at least my offhand is in the way of where their sword would be. And then I can transition to my closed quarter with the sword low and strike. So I'll show this a few times from different angles. From this 3/4 view, step in, find my opponent's sword. The offhand starts drifting to pick up their weapon, because their point would basically either be against my hand at that point or very close to it. And then I finish with my strike. What's important here is I like to turn my offhand, my palm out, so my palm is what's facing the opponent's sword and not the back of my hand. Again, if this was sharp, a blade against the back of the hand, there's a lot of tendons and stuff back there, which would not be super great. And also when I'm coming out, if I get a little bit closer to the screen here, pretend this is this ruler is my sword. I start turning. I want to keep this hand, get it as profile as I can, as soon as I can. So I don't want to come up with my offhand like this and then get stabbed there, and now I'm like playing with stigmata here. I really just want to make sure get that hand nice and profile. Just profile here, turn it out so when my hand is close to my opponent's blade. If they do try to shoot from my hand, it's nice and thin versus like this big meaty target. So that's something else to kind of keep in mind, is you want that to be as thin as possible, and I get more surface area on my hand against their blade versus that, which is going to also make it much easier to control their weapon once I get there. So this first drill is very simple. We're just going to pretend like we found our opponent's blade on the inside, transition to our closed quarter, and then lunge. You can also play around with other footwork. You can do your passing steps, a leaning lunge. I will watch and give some notes. Nice, yeah, that looked good. Yeah. So Laura, one note for you. This is probably basically because you have your sword at this big angle. that when you reach out, your hand is well past your guard. If your sword's not this big angle, but a little bit more straight and extended, you're not going to be able to reach further than your hilt with your offhand. So it should basically be roughly where your hilt is when you kind of reach out and touch your opponent's blade. Yeah, because that way your hilt is still protecting your hand until that last possible moment. But the actual guard when you lunge in, fantastic. Better. Just get that sword extended a little bit more before you get into that forward guard.
It's a little bit difficult to tell how far ahead you're going to have to put your hand in order to get someone else's blade when their blade is not there.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I totally get it. So for in that case, if you're having trouble just visualizing it, don't worry about the visual aspect of it, and just worry about you're basically it found in quarter. As you extend forward, just kind of like snap into that closed quarter with the sword low and the hand high, and then lunge. So you can just take out basically the fight visualization aspect of it. And when we work in person, I can kind of show you the nuance of how that works and stuff. But yeah, you're super right that it is very tricky. Cool. Now any questions on that before we jump to the outside line? Everything else is looking pretty good. Cool. So the outside line works very, very similarly. I'm going to find my opponent here on the outside line. I'm going to basically start reaching my hand forward to get control over the weapon. Then my sword can leave their weapon, and I can strike in this closed terza, or I can turn my hand in secunda. If I just turn around, again, I can strike my opponent here in their thigh, or I can kind of like angle it up a little bit with the sword hilt a little bit lower and kind of get them with that upward strike, or I can just kind of like aim for that rib cage and abdomen. So you kind of have basically anywhere from that rib cage all the way down to the upper thighs, perfectly fine for angles in terms of striking your opponent. So give that a shot. I'll do one more from the front in case anyone needs a different view. Fine from the outside. So offhand extends, gets close enough that I can now leave my opponent's sword and strike. What's tricky about the open offhand versus the dagger, you notice, is that your open offhand doesn't have the same reach. So you do need to be a little bit closer usually to be able to pull this off with the open offhand. Which is why I like using the open offhand as backup and let the sword do the main defensive driving. But if I have a dagger, it's much, much easier. But it's still kind of good to know. It's kind of good to play with. If you have reach, if your opponent kind of outreaches you, you might be able to kind of get into this a little bit more often. Nice, Morwell. That was a good guard. Nice. My one note is if you can, for you, Morwell, is you can get that offhand a little bit high so it protects your head. You're kind of like here-ish. Yeah, which can be a little bit tough because you're pretty broad shouldered and chest. So sometimes tucking that arm in can be a little bit tough, but you do the best you can. But the idea is as much as your head and face as possible. Yeah, really good. There you go. Perfect. Hold on, my one note for you is I think you did that one in quarter. You want to just turn that in secunda or terza. It looked like your hand was your palm up. Unless my view was just funky. Okay, my view I think was just funky. Yeah, you're good. Sorry about that. Let's see. Question: Does it impact the hand placement at all if you're working against an opponent's opposite line? Because you might be approaching from an angle. I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you try clarifying, or if you want to just vocal chat it too?
Oh yeah, I can just say things out loud like a human who's here. I was just curious because like anytime I'm covering my outside line, for example, my opponent is likely coming using quarta rather than secunda, right? Or vice versa, because I'm a lefty. So that often means that people are at like weirder angles instead of just the straight onset. That would be more common if we were both righties or both lefties. So I'm curious if it impacts hand placement.
That's a really good point. So I think part of it's going to depend on where the blade is. So if I find a lefty, because if I do this because a lefty works the other backwards, I find my lefty on my outside, I'm on their inside. If they're kind of just at a neutral and not really trying to cross over my blade, I can still kind of go into that closed terzo or secondo. If I find they're outside and they try to do basically a false edge attack, so they're trying to do basically a punta dritto, I might actually want to pick up and transition into a closed quarter. That's going to really depend on where the point is and angle. So yeah, it kind of, I think that does change it a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Good thinking. Thank you. What about resident lefties? That's great. Any other questions on that? That's a really good question. Cool. Let's see. All right, so now we're going to look at what did I write there? All right, so now we're going to look at what happens if our opponent has our own blade found. So this again, this takes a little bit of fight visualization. If you struggle with that, I'll try to just like break it down into a simple choreography so you kind of get the body mechanics and don't worry about the tactical aspect of it. So on this one, make sure I got my notes right here. All right, so my opponent has me found on my outside line. So they kind of crossed over my sword as a righty from my right to left. If it's a lefty versus lefty, they'd be crossing over from my left to my right. So they have me found this outside line. I can actually find them with my offhand on the inside line because they're crossing this way. All I have to do now is reach my offhand while extending into that closed quarter and then strike. So if they find me on the outside, I actually strike them on the inside because the way their blade is angled. And that assumes that they were actually doing a good finding. So they actually have my blade crossed over and they're not just aiming at basically my elbow. If that's the case, they don't really have my blade found, and I can control their weapon much more easily. But this is kind of assuming you face an opponent that knows about blade control. They don't want you to have that option to that center line, so they have you crossed. So now you can pick up there with your offhand on the inside line to strike. So if I do this from a different angle, my opponent's found me on the outside, so I might even kind of invite them to find me. So it looks like I am finding my opponent on the inside because there's no blade here. But I've actually created an invitation on my outside line. So now that blade is on top of mine on the outside, which allows me to reach with my offhand to pick them up on the inside and strike. So an invitation on the outside is like finding on the inside. I know this one's super confusing. I wish I had an easier way of kind of like a training partner to kind of show this and stuff. And this is specifically if I'm in this closed position. From the open position, things look a little bit differently because my hand can only cross this way while the inside can cross this way and also a little bit to the outside. So if you're really struggling with the fight visualization, I would just basically keep on working on basically create an invitation on the outside and then just snap into that closed quarter with the sword blow. So we're doing a fourth guard with the two-hand position. I'm not sure I know what you mean by that one. Can you try to clarify for me, Elizabeth? Sorry.
Trying to visualize it. So if somebody's coming in on the outside, is it we're pushing the sword away and then attacking, or am I getting okay?
No. So because they have us found here on our outside, so they're crossing over here. Their point is aimed kind of to my offside shoulder. So I can't push them this way. I have to come all the way around to do that. So I'm actually pushing them in the angle that their blade is already pointed because they're angled from my right to my left. I'm just gonna let their blade go that way, and I just kind of extend into quarter. Yeah.
Okay. Think it.
Yeah. It is super funky to kind of picture this one.
Visualization wise, so they're on top, right? They've had you down, they're on top of your blade.
Yep.
So when you're fighting them in quarter, you're not getting on top though, right?
I'm not fighting them at all because my sword is free. This sword is on
Right.
top, so my offhand is what's picking up.
Right,
there.
right. You're picking them up the offhand and then attacking in quarter just in case.
Yeah. So I'm basically as I
Sure.
pick up their blade with my offhand, I'm basically doing a small disengage. If you think about it as a small disengage
Yeah.
into
Okay.
quarter of the sword low, I just think about it as like basically just snap it into the guard. But you can think about it as a small half disengage of the sword while the offhand controls their weapon. If that
Right,
helps
right.
with picturing things.
And because your offhand controls their weapon, your weapon is free, you attack.
Perfect. Yep. Exactly.
And you're attacking in quarter with the true edge towards them just in case.
Yep. We can also do this similar drill to the outside line. So my opponent now has me, my opponent has me found on the inside. So I can even think about like creating a small invitation by opening up my inside line. So their blade is coming from my offhand side here, crossed over basically in the direction where Alfieri is over my shoulder here. So because of that, they've given me an angle of their weapon over my sword. I can reach with my offhand, pick up their sword and then strike in a closed terza or low secunda. So either one of those works. Because again, their sword is crossing over on top of mine. So I'm using my offhand to pick up their weapon, pushing it in the direction their blade is already willing to go. And then I can free my blade to strike. So it works just like the other one. That's assuming that they're doing a good crossing. If they're just like pointing at your inside line, you can just strike in quarter because they're not really much of a threat at that point. But this is assuming that they're actually like controlling your blade. Nice milling. That was a good guard. Nice, Gavin. Took me a second to realize you switched hands. Nice. All right, so now we're going to look at some quick parrying with the sword. So all these, our opponent was basically just either stationary or finding. Now we're going to look at what happens if they like try to throw an attack. But we're still going to do it from us finding their weapon. So we're kind of in control here. Fix my camera. So I'm going to just make sure which drill I want to do first. I want to do. Okay, so I'm going to find my opponent here on the inside line. As I find them, they're disengaging to try to strike me on the outside line, still crossing over my weapon. The crossing is very important here. If they're not crossing, I would just turn my hand over into secunda and strike in this close secunda on the outside line. But assuming that they disengage and getting a good crossing over my weapon, so they're coming from my my sword side shoulder to my offside here. I'm going to just transition my hand into a closed quarter, or do my mini half disengage, you can think about, or I just can just snap into that closed quarter and strike. Because they're striking over my weapon, so I'm using my offhand to pick up their weapon while transition to that closed quarter with the sword low and striking. So it's very similar to the last drill we did. Instead of them finding us, we found them and they're disengaging, trying to attack us on the outside line. So it's very similar to the last couple of drills we just did. So again, I find on the inside, they disengage. Instead of counter disengaging, I'm just leaving my sword here, picking up their sword with my offhand and striking in quarter. Thanks, Grim. Yeah, so folks should be striking in quarter. Yep. Just checking everyone. Good. And real quick, we'll work on the outside line. I have a couple of variations of this one, and then we'll jump into Dagger after. So I'm going to find my opponent here on the outside line. They disengage to tap in the inside with a strong crossing. The point is going from my offhand side to, again, back over where Alfieri is. I can basically, again, pick my hand up, push their weapon towards the outside line, and strike in that closed terza or low secundo guard. So that's one variation. If your opponent basically disengages, tries to get that strong finding while attacking and stuff. Their blade is already kind of pointing from your inside towards your outside, so you can just push it in the direction it kind of already wants to go and stuff. So they'll be in quarta, but you're going to be striking in that outside line of secunda, low secunda, or terza. If they just disengage and strike for your midline, so they're getting no crossing over your weapon, and you still want to use your offhand to parry, and you're in the closed position, you would just lift up into that closed quarter with the sword low and strike. This kind of harps back to what Bella was asking in terms of like blade angulation and the point of where that changes where your hand goes. For sure on the outside line, sorry, on the inside line, if they get in that strong crossing on the inside, you can take their blade to the outside line because that's where their point is aiming at. But if they're just kind of aiming for my center mass, which happens a lot, people will just disengage and throw that middle line shot without really trying to control your weapon. You could use your sword like we did last week, or you can pick up with that offhand and just strike. So their sword is up on my offhand and I'm striking them in that upper thigh or lower abdomen region. That's a fun one to kind of really play with a partner. Just have them change, have them find on a line, have them change where they're targeting you, and just kind of play around with what close guards you actually need to do to pick them up and stuff. Because then you can turn that into an option drill in terms of like, did they get a crossing on their attack or not? And that will make you kind of have that quick decision. Nice. Nice moral. Yeah, might want to know for you more because everything's looking really good. So just to kind of, we're going to fine tune this a little bit. Instead of keeping the sword super high and also the offhand high, you can lower the point of your sword just a few inches. So instead of aiming your sword up here by your opponent, you're kind of aiming for my flank, aim for my squishy bits. So they're just below the rib cage. Everything else is looking really good, so we're kind of fine tuning. Yeah. Okay, so I can, yeah, let me try.
If you had your ruler on the stick and the clamp, if not, I don't know that it'll work, but
No, yeah, I forgot to set that up today.
yeah, we can work on that another time.
Yeah, sorry about that. I should have thought of that ahead of time. All right, so now take a quick water break because it's humid over here, even though it's not very warm, as you can see by my shirt. And then we're going to jump into the Dagger and kind of look at what these plays look like with Dagger. All right, so if we want to basically if we're finding our opponent's blade, we want to keep our sword free and transition to our dagger. It's much easier because this dagger is much longer than my hand is, obviously, since I have to hold the dagger here in the grip, which means I can perform this much safer from a further distance, which is great. So these plays are much more viable with some kind of offhand weapon, specifically the dagger, because it's just the reach that it kind of provides. Again, you can do it with the offhand like we just did, but it's much safer to do it with a piece of steel instead of a piece of flesh. So let's start off with the basic plays that we looked at with the offhand, now with dagger. So I'm going to find my opponent's sword here on the inside line. I'm going to reach out with the dagger to control their weapon, transition to that closed quarter with the sword low and dagger high, and then finish my attack. So basically my opponent either is stepping into this and I take the tempo to strike them in this guard, or they just not know what, they don't realize they're in trouble and they give me time to basically get control of the weapon with my dagger and strike. So how we get into this kind of varies based on distance and measure and all that stuff, but for a basic mechanical drill, find on the inside, reach with the dagger to pick up their weapon, get into that closed quarter so the pummels of my sword and dagger are touching, and then I can lunge, or I can do a passing lunge, depending on, at that point, how much distance I need to cover, or if they start to run away, that passing lunge might come in a lot of help. Give that a go, and I'll watch some folks. Looking pretty good, Morel. Nice. Nice, Laura. Graham, that's also really good. So many pretty close guards. Also, Melanie, nice use of the sail guard in terms of like, yeah, use that offhand protection. Yeah, these are all looking really nice. These are really pretty close guards. It makes me so happy. Cool, so now we're gonna look at the same idea on the outside line. So I'm gonna step in and find my opponent's weapon on the outside line. And then I'm going to reach with my dagger to get my sword across over theirs, transition into my closed terza or low secunda, and then strike. So again, my sword arm here is still at shoulder height, more or less. The tip drifts down a little bit, so I'm protecting and striking the low line, and that dagger is covering my head. So if they try to go underneath my dagger, if they're gonna run into my sword, they try to go over my dagger. It's such a big cutover that's very easy to transition over and pick them up on the opposite line, or like you'll just finish and strike them and walk well past their point at that point. So again, just from a different angle, I'll do it from this corner. Find on the outside, reach, grab, get control of their weapon with your dagger, transition to that closed terza or closed secunda, and then finish with a lunge. We're going to be passing lunge as well, depending on, again, how much distance you need to cover. Nice close guard, Morel. Those are looking good. And what's key with here, if you start doing this with like with partners at practice, you want to make sure that like before your sword leaves your opponent's sword, you have your dagger in the way. If I drop my sword and then reach with my dagger or start coming forward a little too early, I'm going to probably run onto the point. So I need to make sure that my sword's covering theirs, the dagger gets control of theirs, then my sword can leave safely to strike them. I want to make sure that those are in place before I send my body forward. The body always goes after the blades go. Especially with this, when we're trying to like transfer which blade is controlling our opponent's sword, there's a lot of ways that if we move too early, a lot of bad stuff can happen to us. Nice, good, good. Let's see what we got for time. About 10 minutes. Okay, let's see. Yeah. All right, so now we're gonna look at like what if our opponent has us controlled with they control our sword, how we can use the dagger to get out of it. So again, my opponent here has found my blade over my outside line. From here, I can reach out with my dagger to pick up their weapon, because again, their weapon is crossing that direction. And I can transition to my closed quarter in lunge. This is assuming that they're doing a good, strong crossing on the outside line. So they got an angled blade, and then the blade's not just straight, but it's actually angled. So the blade is already pointing towards my left side here as a right-hander, which means that I can easily, from this closed position with the dagger, pick up their weapon, do that mini or half disengage with my sword in lunge. And it's possible if your opponent is looking to do a closed secunda to strike, you might need to strike around their dagger. In that case, there are two ways you can kind of get extra crossing around their weapons. The first one is you can basically just do a punta reversi. So I'm basically doing a false edge angled attack. So if I'm your opponent here in closed secunda, you would need to be striking around the dagger at that point, and doing that false edge punta reversi can help you get around the dagger and hit me in the ribcage. So that's one way you can get around that closed secunda. The other one is basically do a cross line step, which also gives you that same kind of angle. So I could, if I want, I could do both at the same time. So I can find them. They can find them on the outside. I can pick up with the dagger and then do a cross line step with a false edge punta reversi here to get around their close secunda destruction. But for a basic play, you can just go into the straight quarter lunge. Nice, Gio. That was nice and smooth. I like it. Thanks, Grim. Yeah, when that basic play works, try it with like the punta reversi, so the false edge, and also try with the cross line lunge. That's a general no for anyone. So like the basic play is just pick up in that closed quarter in lunge, and then you can play around with the angle of the sword and also the footwork to kind of imagine striking around a closed secunda. So you're trying to strike around that dagger that's protecting the ribcage.
A quick question. You had said something about doing like a little disengage, but if they've found us, we're not really doing disengage?
Yeah, so I was just saying like a small disengage because that's how it was working in Grimm's mind. So like they have me covered over my sword. So as I pick up with the dagger, I'm not just keeping the sword high because I might end up actually pushing their blade into my blade. So like I see it as just transitioning into a low quarter. But like the way Grim was thinking about it is like you pick up the dagger, small disengage low, and then strike. So you get to the same position, just a different way of thinking of it. Good question. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a cool way, like two different really cool ways to think about how to get into there. So whatever works for people's brains. Awesome. Let's see, what else we got here? I wrote so many drills and we so little time. Cool. Let's do basically finding our opponent's blade and then attacking us. So we're basically set up contra tempo plays here. Fix my camera again. So on here we'll start off with finding on the inside line. So there's two plays we can do from here. So I have my opponent found. They try to attack me here on the outside line. If I'm close enough or I'm fast enough, as they disengage, I can basically just reach over, pick up their sword with my dagger on the outside line here with this kind of angulated dagger blade and strike again in a close terza or a low quarter. So I'm basically catching them as they're trying to come up from the disengage. So if I'm your opponent, I'm disengaging, you're catching me right here. I'm not actually getting all the way up to finish the disengage. You're basically catching your opponent 3/4 of the way through. And this is easy to do if you're very close, or if they make it such a big disengage, or you force them to make a big disengage, that you're able to have the time to just reach over, catch their blade, and then finish your attack. Also, kind of keep in mind, if this is a contra-tempo play and our opponent is disengaging into attacking us, we might not need to cover much distance to hit them, right? So if I'm your opponent and I did my disengage and attack, I'm doing this big lunge, I'm covering a lot of ground. So when you do this parry, you might just need to kind of go into your forward guard or maybe a leaning lunge. But again, this also depends on the range distance between you and your opponent. I am not brain today, I apologize. So again, find on the inside, they do a big disengage, and I catch them with the dagger on the outside, and I can just finish with a very simple contra-tempo attack. Probably not needing to cover a lot of range at all if they're covering doing a lot of the measuring collapsing for me. So that's the first variation of that, assuming that we're very close again, or we're making our opponent make a big disengage, or maybe they just make big disengages anyways because they're very new, so the disengages are just huge because they just haven't worked at it a ton. All those are scenarios that we might run into. Now we're a little bit further away from our opponent, or our opponent has tighter disengages. We might not be fast enough to just catch them on the outside with the dagger, and they might actually finish their disengage. They might actually finish their full disengage to the outside line. In that case, it's going to look very similar to basically when they had us found on the outside and we transitioned into our closed quarter to strike them. So I had them found on here on the inside line. They disengage to the outside, but they get all the way to basically they're close to secunda position, but they are definitely crossing over my weapon from the outside line. So their point is from my sword side, aiming to my dagger side here. From here, because they're giving me that angle, I can just transition into that closed quarter and then strike. And again, if I need to go around their weapon, I can do that punta reversi, or I can do it with the cross-line lunge, or a mixture of the two. So this is us finding this, controlling their weapon later in their disengage. So I find them the inside. They disengage. They get to the outside, crossing over my weapon from the outside. So I pick up with the dagger and counter strike in my close quarter. And again, I might just need to kind of go into my forward guard here, or I might need to do a small step with my foot for a counter attack. That's going to really come down to how much range difference is between you and your opponent. So give those both a try. Yeah, looking good. Yeah, so if you're really close, you can do that closed terza. If you're further away, you're going to probably pick them up in that closed quarter. If you're like, man, I'm just really struggling with this fight visualization aspect of this, just worry about finding on the inside, transition into quarter, or finding on the inside, transitioning into close terza or low secunda. That's basically what the mechanical part of the drill is. If your brain's like, I just can't picture this, practicing those will definitely get you there when we can work in person. Cool. So I'm going to look at us finding them, our opponent on the outside line, and then disengaging to attack us on the inside. So again, this has also two variations depending on where our opponent is disengaging to attack us. So I have them found here on the outside line. So they're locked out here on my outside, but I got this big opening invitation here on the inside, which is where they're going to be throwing their attack. If they're throwing their attack and they're actually trying to get a good crossing over my weapon to really kind of lock me out, from here I can still pick them up, transition and counter strike them in that closed terza or low secunda position, because they're actually crossing my weapon from my left to my right as a right-hander here. So from there, because of doing that, I can easily just bring my dagger over because they're already pointing that direction, lock them out with a dagger, and counter strike. because it's assuming that they are disengaging, trying to get a good crossing over the weapon, and actually doing a big lunge to try to hit me. They're not just kind of doing a disengage for the sake of a disengage. They actually disengage and throw an attack at me. So they're covering a lot of the distance for me at this point. So again, fine on the outside. They disengage. They're actually trying to lock out the line here, so I can pick them up with the dagger and strike it on the outside line. Which is the funky part, because they're attacking on the inside, but we kind of strike them on the outside. So give that, and then we'll look at the second version to close things out. Nice. Yeah, so actually, Moro, I'll be left here for a second just to kind of see this one. So you have your opponent found here on the outside. They disengage to your inside. So the inside line is basically anywhere you can hug somebody, say between your two arms. Even if my arm is over here, they're still on the inside of my sword, basically. So they're kind of crossing over this direction. So their sword point is actually aimed over your left shoulder. And then from there, you can just reach the dagger out to push their sword already in that direction and then counter strike. So my dagger is high, my sword is low, my dagger is covering my head, and my sword is low. And this is all nice and straight line. So like my sword arm is straight from the shoulder to the tip of my sword. It's not like bent out here or crossing my body. It's just a nice straight line, and that dagger is covering the head. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Yeah, and then you're just using that edge of the dagger to push them out of the way. Yep. Looking good. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. It's looking nice. All right, in the second variation, just like we looked at the offhand, the open offhand, you have your opponent found here on the outside line. But now when they disengage you, attack you on the inside, they're not trying to get good crossing or lock you out on the inside. They're just aiming for this center mass. So from here, when we find on the outside, because they're attacking on the inside, we can just pick up with the dagger, transition to that closed quarter, and attack. This one probably feels a little bit more natural because we find on the outside, they just come straight over to our center line. We pick up the dagger and finish with that closed quarter. And this attack happens a lot. A lot of people, when they disengage and attack on the inside line, they don't really try to control the opponent's weapon. They just go for that quick shot. And just hoping that you don't basically double kill them or you're just faster than them and stuff. So it's that kind of attack is better in our sport because your chance of death is nil. Not super great. These were sharp though. Yeah. So on this one, this one, your sword is going to be basically, so I'm going to pretend my dagger's not here. Your sword is going to, after firing on the outside, turn a quarter, which is the palm up. So it goes palm up and across your body. So it's protecting your offside shoulder, your right hand shoulder. And now your dagger is basically just pummel to pummel with your sword. So you're protecting your right side of your body because you're a lefty. So if I do this as a lefty for you, fine on the outside, they disengage, aiming for my center mass. So I pick up with the dagger, pushing them towards my right side. The sword goes with. So I end up pummel to pummel, and my point is low, aiming at their belly button, basically, or that lower flank. Yeah. So it's basically like the last guy we did is on our left side of our body as a lefty. This version just turned over onto the right side. So both hands kind of just turn, they're facing a little bit. Nice. Awesome. So we didn't get to cover everything I wanted to, but there's just so many plays we can do with the dagger and stuff. This is kind of like as always, a bit of a crash course on the different uses and stuff like that. Like I said, like it's much easier to use the dagger for these counterattacks and stuff than is the offhand. But it's kind of good to still practice the offhand, or at least know that you can do it with the offhand and stuff. Any questions or any thoughts? Anything, light bulb moments? Anything that like, man, this still doesn't make any sense? Any of that is good to know. Awesome. You all rock. So last week we looked at the sword doing all the work and the dagger being backup. This week we looked at the dagger doing most of the work and the sword being backup. The next couple of weeks we want to actually probably look at some extra fun plays. We'll probably maybe look at like Quinta, so like basically your low terza and the fun plays we can do from there. And then maybe also we'll look at like some of the dagger extended guards, because we can also do it with the open offhand, but there's ways we need to like change things up, because also just reaching out with my fleshy hand and this shop is not a great idea typically. But again, because it's a sport, we can kind of get away with some extra funky things and stuff. Awesome. So I'm going to shut down the recording, but I'll be around for like post-practice hangouts in case anyone has any questions that they didn't want to have on the recording. Thanks, everybody.